Regret in emergencies doesn't come from what you didn't know. It comes from what you ignored. Because in normal life, everything feels available. If something runs out, you just buy more. If you forget something, you fix it later. If you need something, it's usually one trip away. That mindset works, until it doesn't. When systems stay stable, supply chains hide their fragility. Shelves look permanent. Availability feels guaranteed. So people delay preparation because there's no urgency pushing them. And that delay is the problem. Because when conditions shift, even slightly, the behavior of everyone changes at the same time. People don't prepare gradually in those moments. They move all at once. And that's when shortages happen. Not because production stopped, but because demand spikes instantly. The result is predictable. Items that were ignored yesterday become impossible to find today. And the frustrating part is not just scarcity. It's realization. People start thinking back. I should have gotten that earlier. I didn't think it would matter. I assumed it would always be there. That's where regret forms. Not in the crisis itself, but in the gap between awareness and action. Now here's what experienced planners understand differently. They don't wait for confirmation that something is important. They look at function. If something supports water, food, power, communication, it has long-term value. Because those 5 areas become harder, not easier, when systems are stressed. And most people underestimate how fast that shift happens. Another key mistake is focusing only on dramatic items. People think survival equals gear, tools, or extreme scenarios. But in reality, the most valuable items are often ordinary things used in large volume. Basic supplies that maintain daily function. The kind of things nobody pays attention to until they're gone. That's the pattern behind every shortage event. Not rarity, tension. Once attention shifts, availability disappears. And once it disappears, you can't easily recover it. So the real question isn't what looks important today. It's what becomes impossible to replace when conditions change. Because those are the items people regret the most. Not because they were expensive, but because they were obvious and still ignored. Item 1. Clean drinking water storage capacity. Most people think they're covered because they can buy water anytime. That assumption works in normal conditions. It fails the moment demand spikes. Because bottled water is not the real asset. It's temporary access. And temporary access disappears fast when everyone is competing for it at the same time. What people regret later isn't just not buying water. It's not having a way to store enough of it when it was still available. In early stages of disruption, taps may still work. Pressure may still be stable. Supply may still exist. But that window is short. And once people realize there's uncertainty, consumption behavior changes instantly. Stores empty faster than expected. Not because water stopped existing, but because everyone started collecting it at once. Now here's the real issue. Water isn't just for drinking. It supports everything. Cooking, hygiene, cleaning, basic survival function. And people underestimate how quickly daily use adds up. A few liters per person becomes a large volume requirement over even a short period. That's where regret starts forming. Because once bottled supplies run out, the next step isn't always easy. You either have storage capacity to use available water sources, or you are dependent on constant access that may no longer be reliable. That difference matters. Smart preparation isn't just about buying bottles. It's about being able to hold water when it's still flowing. Containers, tanks, storage systems. Anything that increases capacity without relying on constant restocking. These are the things people overlook because they don't feel urgent. They don't disappear first. They disappear later, after the obvious options are gone. And by then, it's too late to replace them easily. Because in real situations, the biggest limitation isn't supply alone. It's storage and control over what you can keep. And once people realize that, it's already a regret, not a decision. Item 2. Reliable lighting sources. When power fails, most people don't panic immediately. They wait. They assume it will come back soon. A short outage. A temporary issue. But as time passes and darkness continues, reality shifts fast. And that's when regret starts forming. Because lighting isn't optional. It changes how you function in every way. Without it, movement becomes slower and riskier. Simple tasks take longer. Safety decreases immediately. Most people think they are prepared because they own flashlights. But flashlights alone are not a system. They are dependent on batteries. And batteries are limited. They get used faster than expected, especially when people underestimate how often they will need light. That's the mistake. In early moments of disruption, people use light freely, checking things, moving around, searching, staying informed. Then later, when they actually need it, there is none left. Now here's the deeper issue. Lighting isn't just about visibility. It's about control. When you have reliable light, you stay organized. You reduce mistakes. You maintain awareness of your surroundings. Without it, everything becomes uncertain. That uncertainty adds stress. And stress leads to poor decisions. Now consider what often gets overlooked. Alternative lighting systems that don't depend heavily on constant replacement. Simple, fuel-based or long-duration solutions that are often ignored in the beginning because they don't feel urgent. They sit on shelves longer. Until they don't. Because once people realize lighting is essential for every hour after sunset, demand spikes immediately. And at that point, options are gone. Not because lighting is rare, but because it becomes obvious too late. That's where regret comes from. Not from lack of awareness, but from delay. Because lighting is one of those things people assume will always be there, until they experience a night without it. And once that happens, it changes how they think permanently. Item 3. Shelf-stable, calorie-dense food. Food is the first thing people think they are prepared for, and the first thing they usually underestimate. Most households believe they have enough food because the fridge is full or there are a few days of groceries in the kitchen. That feels secure in normal life. But normal life doesn't apply when supply chains slow down or break. Because food isn't just about having something to eat. It's about having enough calories to maintain energy, focus, and basic function over time. And that's where regret starts. When people realize too late that what they stored is too low in calories, too dependent on refrigeration, too fast to spoil or run out. They don't lack food immediately. They lack duration. Now here's what actually matters in real situations. Foods that last long, store easily, and provide high energy per serving. Not variety. Not comfort. Function. Because when conditions are unstable, people don't eat normally. They eat less predictably, sometimes more, sometimes less, depending on stress and access. That unpredictability makes planning harder if your supply is weak. Now consider what happens during early disruption phases. Stores still exist, but they empty quickly. Not evenly. Not slowly. Certain items vanish first because people recognize them immediately. But the deeper issue is what comes after that. What's left is often less efficient food, items that take more volume to deliver fewer calories. That forces people to consume faster than they planned. And once consumption accelerates, the timeline shortens. That's where regret builds. Because people realize they didn't prepare for time. They prepared for short-term availability. Smart preparation focuses on calorie density and storage life. Simple staples that don't rely on refrigeration, don't spoil quickly, and can stretch over longer periods. Because in real scenarios, the goal isn't just eating. It's maintaining stability for as long as possible while everything else adjusts. And once people understand that too late, they don't regret not having food. They regret not having enough time built into their food supply. Item 4. Fuel and cooking capability. Most people don't think about fuel until it becomes a problem. In normal life, it's always available. You go to the store, refill when needed, and assume it will always work that way. That assumption breaks quickly when systems are under stress. Because fuel is not just about transportation. It's about function. Without fuel, a large part of daily survival becomes harder immediately. Cooking food, boiling water, producing heat, maintaining basic comfort. And when those functions disappear, everything else becomes more difficult. That's where regret starts forming. People realize too late that they stored food, but didn't secure a way to prepare it. Raw supplies become limited in usefulness. Even if you have food, without a way to cook or heat it properly, your options shrink. Now here's what happens during early disruption phases. Fuel is often overlooked at first. People rush for food, water, and basic items. But fuel aisles stay untouched slightly longer. Not because they aren't important, but because people don't immediately connect fuel with survival. That delay creates opportunity, but only for a short time. Once awareness spreads, fuel demand spikes fast. And when that happens, availability drops quickly. At that point, it becomes one of the hardest things to replace. Now consider the deeper issue. Fuel creates independence. If you can generate heat, cook meals, or boil water on your own, you are not dependent on external systems for basic function. Without it, every task becomes more restrictive and time-consuming. And that increases pressure over time. Because survival is not just about having resources. It's about being able to use them effectively. Now here's where regret becomes clear. People don't realize they needed fuel until everything else is already in place but unusable without it. It becomes the missing link. The item that turns preparation into actual capability. And once people see that gap too late, it's no longer preparation. It's limitation. Item 5. Basic medical supplies. Most people assume medical help will always be available. If something happens, you go to a clinic. You buy medicine. You get treatment. That assumption feels safe because it works in normal life. But normal systems depend on stability. And stability is the first thing that breaks under pressure. That's where regret begins. Because injuries and health issues don't stop when systems become unstable. They often increase. Small cuts, infections, headaches, fever, dehydration. Nothing extreme at first. But small problems become serious when they aren't treated early. Now here's the key issue. Most people don't stock basic medical supplies until they actually need them. And by that time, demand has already increased. Pharmacies become crowded. Simple items disappear quickly. And what remains is limited or expensive. But the deeper problem isn't just availability. It's delay. Because untreated minor issues can escalate fast when conditions are not ideal. A small infection can become a serious problem if not handled early. That's where regret comes from. Not from major emergencies, but from ignoring small, manageable ones. Now consider what usually gets overlooked. Basic items that support immediate care. Not complex treatment. Just simple, essential supplies that help stabilize minor issues before they become bigger problems. Those items are often available early on. But they are not prioritized. Because people assume they won't need them immediately. That assumption is what creates vulnerability. Now here's the shift in thinking. Medical readiness is not about advanced treatment. It's about preventing small problems from growing. Because in unstable conditions, access to care is limited. And self-reliance becomes necessary much earlier than expected. When people realize this too late, they don't regret not having advanced medicine. They regret not having basic control over early-stage problems. Because by then, simple issues have already escalated. And recovery becomes harder than prevention ever was. Item 6. Clean water treatment and purification. Most people think having water is enough. It isn't. Water without treatment is just a risk in liquid form. That's the part people realize too late. They focus on storing bottles, filling containers, and collecting supply, but ignore what happens when that stored water runs out or when clean sources become uncertain. That's where regret begins. Because access to water is only half the problem. Safety is the other half. And safety is not guaranteed in unstable conditions. Now here's what actually happens during disruptions. Even if water is available, it may not be reliable. Pressure changes. Storage conditions vary. Contamination risk increases. And in those moments, people who didn't prepare for purification suddenly lose control over their supply. They either run out of clean water or take risks with unsafe water. Both outcomes create problems. Now here's the key issue. Purification is what extends your supply. It turns limited access into repeated usability. Without it, every liter of water becomes a countdown. With it, every source becomes usable with caution and control. That difference is critical. Now consider why regret forms here. Because purification tools don't feel urgent at first. They sit quietly on shelves. They are not part of the panic rush. People focus on what they can see immediately: bottles, containers, visible supplies. Not the system that makes everything else usable. By the time they realize its importance, demand has already increased, and availability decreases. Now here's the deeper reality. Water problems don't arrive all at once. They build slowly, and that slow change creates false confidence early on. People assume they are fine until they aren't. And when that shift happens, options become limited fast. Because without purification, your dependency increases. And dependency under stress leads to pressure. That pressure is what forces poor decisions. So the real regret is not just lacking water. It's lacking control over whether your water is safe or not. And once people experience that loss of control, they understand too late that storage alone was never enough. Item 7. Power backup and simple energy sources. Most people assume electricity will always be there. It's one of the strongest modern assumptions, because it rarely fails in daily life. Lights turn on. Phones charge. Devices work. So people build habits around constant power without thinking about what happens when it disappears. That's where regret begins. Because when power goes out, it doesn't just affect lighting. It affects everything connected to it. Communication, information access, basic comfort, even safety routines. And once it's gone, the adjustment is immediate. Now here's what most people experience. At first, they wait. They assume it will return quickly. They conserve nothing. They use devices normally. They continue life as usual. But when downtime extends, the problem becomes real. And by that point, backup options are already limited. Batteries are drained. Power banks are low. Charging options are uncertain. Now they're in a reactive position. That's where regret forms. Because power backup wasn't considered early enough. Now here's the deeper issue. Power is not just convenience. It's control over information and communication. Without it, you lose awareness of what's happening beyond your immediate surroundings. And that creates uncertainty. Now consider what smart preparation focuses on. Not just having power, but extending it. Simple systems that allow limited energy to last longer. Rechargeable sources. Backup charging options. Low energy usage habits. Not complex setups. Just reliable extensions. Because in real situations, the goal is not full comfort. It's continuity. Now here's why regret happens. People only think about power when it's already gone. They don't prepare for the transition period, the moment when everything still works, but failure is approaching. That window closes quietly. And once it does, options shrink quickly. Because energy is always one of the first invisible dependencies to fail under stress. And when it does, everything else becomes harder. That's when people realize too late that power wasn't just an accessory. It was the foundation for almost everything they were doing. Item 8. Hygiene and sanitation supplies. Hygiene is one of the most underestimated areas in any disruption. At first, it doesn't feel urgent. People focus on food, water, and power because those are immediate survival concerns. But hygiene works differently. Its impact is delayed, then sudden. That's where regret begins. Because when hygiene breaks down, problems don't stay small for long. Minor issues become bigger. Skin infections, illness spreading faster, living conditions becoming harder to manage. And once that happens, everything else becomes more difficult to maintain. Now here's the key mistake. People assume hygiene products are nice to have, not essential. So they don't prioritize them early. They think they can manage later. But later often comes with limited access. Stores become crowded. Supplies get inconsistent. Basic items disappear quietly while attention is elsewhere. Now consider what actually matters in sanitation. It's not luxury, it's prevention. Keeping conditions clean reduces risk across everything else. Without it, even a well-prepared setup becomes unstable over time. Now here's why regret forms. Because hygiene supplies are usually cheap, simple, and widely available at first. So people delay buying them. They assume they're always easy to replace. But once demand increases, availability changes quickly. And by the time people notice, it's already harder to find them. Now here's the deeper reality. Hygiene is not separate from survival. It supports it. Clean conditions affect health, comfort, energy, ability to function normally. When hygiene fails, everything else feels heavier. That's why experienced planners secure it early, not because it's dramatic, but because it prevents escalation. And once people experience conditions where hygiene becomes difficult to maintain, they realize it was never optional. It was foundational. Item 9. Information access tools. Information is the first thing people underestimate, and the last thing they realize they've lost. At the beginning of any disruption, everyone still feels connected. Phones work. Internet is available. Updates are flowing constantly. So people assume they will always know what's happening. That assumption breaks faster than expected. Because information doesn't fail all at once. It becomes unreliable first. Signals weaken. Updates lag. Conflicting reports appear. Some areas stay connected while others don't. And suddenly, the world becomes fragmented. That's where regret begins. Because once people lose reliable information, they start making decisions based on rumors, delayed updates, incomplete understanding. And that leads to confusion. Now here's the key issue. Without accurate information, everything becomes guesswork. You don't know what areas are stable, what supplies are still available, what conditions are changing nearby. And that uncertainty affects every decision. Now consider what happens in early stages. People rely heavily on digital sources. But those systems depend on power and network stability. When either weakens, access becomes inconsistent. And that inconsistency creates panic behavior, because uncertainty spreads faster than facts. Now here's where smart preparation differs. It includes backup ways to stay informed that don't rely entirely on online systems. Simple tools like battery-powered radios, offline reference materials, printed local information or guides. Nothing advanced, just independent. Because independence matters when systems become unstable. Now here's why regret forms here. Because people assume they will figure it out in real time. But real time becomes chaotic when information is incomplete. And decisions made under incomplete information are always higher risk. Now here's the deeper truth. Information is not just awareness. It is control. If you know what's happening, you can respond correctly. If you don't, you react blindly. And reaction under pressure rarely produces good outcomes. So the real loss isn't just not knowing. It's not having a reliable way to know. Now bring everything together. These 9 categories are not about extreme survival scenarios. They are about maintaining function when normal systems slow down or become unreliable. Water storage, lighting, fuel, medical supplies, purification, tools, hygiene, information access. Each one supports a basic function that people assume will always be available, until it isn't. And that's where regret forms. Not because items were rare, but because they were available early and ignored. The pattern is always the same. People wait for visible urgency. Smart preparation happens before urgency exists. Because once urgency arrives, you're no longer preparing. You're competing. And by then, the advantage is already gone.